Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant so tender and
in everybody's heart. We will keep thy holy light every moment, day and night. Every soul will feel thy light, thy love and light. Sing thy glory to praise the Lord. Sing thy story to spread his love. Sing thy glory to feel thy light, to be thy light. Sing thy glory to praise the Lord. Sing thy story to spread his love. Sing thy glory to feel thy light, to be thy light. Sing thy glory to praise the Lord. Sing thy story to spread his love. Sing thy glory to feel thy light, to be thy light.
There is only one religion, the religion of love. There is only one caste, the caste of humanity. There is only one language, the language of the heart. There is only one God. He is omnipresent.
Sai Ram. Welcome to the Sri Satya Sai Global Council series, The Essence of All Religion is One. This will be a journey of exploration of the great faiths of the world done via panel discussions featuring followers of Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba. A core teaching of Baba is that the essence of all religions is one. This fundamental commonality among all religions comes out when they are understood properly, using the principles of love, service to fellow man, and unity. These are all promoted within all of these great traditions. Sai Baba has emphasized the positives of each religion and taught that criticizing other paths to try and promote one's own path was counterproductive and actually against true spirituality. This sentiment is captured in a discourse Baba gave on the 23rd of July, 1989. Quote, "Realize that the essence of all religions is one. Don't enter into futile controversies or criticize other religions. It is fraught with danger. When you attack another religion, you are really guilty of assailing your own religion. Therefore, show your reverence to everyone." So each segment in this series will focus on one great tradition as understood by panelists who were either born into it or raised in a community of that faith. And we'll highlight how each of their appreciation and love for their own tradition grew when they started to understand it through the lens of Sai Baba's teachings.
అల్లా ఎంచు మహమ్మదీయులు,
Mohammedans call him Allah.
జెహోవా ఎంచు సత్క్రైస్తవులు,
Good Christians call him Jehovah.
పుల్లబ్జాక్షుడనంచు విష్ణు వైష్ణవులు,
And Vaishnavites call him as Fullabhyaksha.
శంభో ఎంచు సేవులు సదా.
Shaivites call him Shambho.
ప్రలాభమున కొలువ అందరికీ ఐశ్వర్యమును, దయను, ప్రేమను అందించి కాపాడేటువంటి దేవుడు ఒక్కడే అని భావించుడి.
We may give him any number of names, extol him as Allah, Jehovah, Vishnu and Shiva, but yet the same God confers plenty,
దైవం
prosperity,
ఒక్కడే.
compassion. God is one.
పేర్లు అనేకంగా ఉంటున్నాయి.
He has many names.
ఒక్కొక్కరు దానిని గురించి ఒక మతంగా స్థాపించుకుంటూ వచ్చారు.
And every religion has got its own
ఈ మతములు
comprehension.
వేరు కాదు.
In fact, they are different. not different.
మతములన్నీ వేరు, మార్గము ఒక్కటే.
Though religions differ, the path is one.
వస్త్ర భేదము వేరు, వస్తువు ఒకటే.
The yarn is one, though cloth seems to be different.
శృంగారములు వేరు, బంగారం ఒక్కటే.
Jewels are different, but gold is one.
పశుల వన్నెలు వేరు, పాలు ఒకటే.
The color of the cows is different, but
జీవ జంతువులు
milk is
వేరు,
one.
జీవుండు ఒక్కడే.
Though there are many individuals, but the indweller
జాతి
is same.
నీతులు వేరు, జన్మం ఒకటే.
There may be many of the beings, but the birth is same.
కనుకనే ప్రతి మానవుడు కూడాను తన తత్వాన్ని తాను గుర్తించుకుంటే సత్యము స్మరణకు వస్తుంది.
Therefore, if everyone investigates and inquires to know his true nature, he can experience truth.
Sairam, welcome to the first edition of our series, The Essence of Religion is One. We are very fortunate to have with us a very distinguished panel comprised of followers of Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba. I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Frank Morgan. Frank was raised in a devout Catholic family in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he studied to be a priest for 3 years. He first heard about Sai Baba in the early 1970s and was attracted to his miracles, sensing their similarity to the miracles of Jesus. He attended the Scranton Sai Center for a few years and then the Atlanta Center since 1987, where by his grace, he continues to be an active member. Next, we have Ms. Terry Rice Kennedy. Terry has worked as a professor of English in California, as well as an award-winning investigative journalist, writing on social justice issues and spirituality. After hearing about the holy man Sri Satya Sai Baba of India in 1990, Terry left the US determined to meet him and ended up staying in Puttaparthi, where his ashram is located, for 27 years. Years that she speaks of as the most transformative of her life. During that time in India, Terry wrote for the newspaper, the Deccan Herald, on the teachings of Satya Sai Baba and on His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. She taught English to Tibetan Lama Sao Sur Tri Rinpoche, a sixth incarnation master, and to Tibetan monks from Mungad, near Goa. She also volunteered at the Jyoti Seva Home for Blind Orphans in the Venkateshpuram sector of Bangalore that was run by nuns from Poland. Next, we have Dr. Andrew DeMille. Andrew's parents grew up Baptist and Catholic, and he had a general exposure to Christianity through holidays and sporadic services throughout childhood. He came into the Sai fold in 2001 and has served in many officer roles, most recently as the Southeast USA Young Adult Advisor. He is currently a professor of Spanish and linguistics and the chair of the Department of Languages and Linguistics at the University of Tampa. This career has allowed him to move amongst various cultures and languages, which has given him a perspective on cultural norms, values, and practices, which has informed his view of religions and spirituality. And our final panelist is Mr. Kevin Nelson. Kevin was born in North Platte, Nebraska. His introduction to God and spirituality was through Christ and one of his grandparents who took her faith seriously. A particular challenge he faced was starting his journey to adulthood in 1968, a year of intense violence in the United States. Around 1982, a person he was working with while living in South Florida mentioned Sai Baba and offered the book, The Holy Man and the Psychiatrist. He was captivated by the stories, but also cautious, as he feared the book could just be an exaggeration or worse. He then went on to read a series of Swami's discourses. The depth of Bhagwan Baba's statement struck him as something that could not have been disingenuous. Through the years, he has held many officer positions, including Regional Service Coordinator and Regional Young Adult Coordinator. So let's jump right in with our first question for the panel. The first question, which we'll start with Frank, and then Terry, Kevin, and Andrew, and then we'll mix up the order just to keep it interesting. So this question, first starting with Frank, can you share your religious/spiritual upbringing and journey? Frank?
Thank you. Yes, I'll be happy to. As was given in the introduction, I came from a devout Irish Catholic family where there was 4 boys, no girls. And my identity as a young man was split between being American and Irish, but most decidedly we were taught to believe that being a Catholic was a great grace and a great benefit. And whereas some of my peers said that they did not believe the devout teachings of their youth, I was a very devout fellow, and up until 3 years after my high school was done, I was studying to be a priest, a Catholic priest. And there was an intellectual change where I felt that the Catholic faith didn't speak to me, but I always had a great attraction to the miracles of Jesus. And so when in 1971, I heard about Sri Satya Sai Baba, what the link for me was to my youth and to the miracles of Jesus. And I didn't so much want to know what Sai Baba taught as, are the miracles real? And they seem to be real, so it engendered a certain interest, greater interest on my part. And the growth from that point was deeper into the teachings of Jesus. And just wrapping up this part of my answer now, that inner growth towards what Sai Baba rather taught, the essence of it, is my focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. So you were always a sincere spiritual seeker, having been interested in becoming a priest. So I'm looking forward to hearing further in your journey later on. Next up, we have Terry.
Yes, I was very rooted in the knowledge of God and God's love. And I was baptized in the Catholic Church when I was an infant. And I had the good fortune to be raised by my Polish grandmother, who only spoke Polish, though we lived in the United States. So I learned everything in English and in Polish because I went to Catholic school, and then I went to another Catholic school, which was run by Polish nuns. So some of the key things that I learned were God was all loving, God was all forgiving, and that God was omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient. And that really came home to me at a very, very young age, small age, even before I learned these things in Catholic school, that there was nowhere I could go where God wasn't with me. But the fact that I couldn't see this God, because yes, Jesus, there were photos or paintings depicting allegedly Jesus, but we never saw God. We saw like some light shooting out of a photo or something. And I was determined to see this God face to face very, very early, because my grandmother encouraged my curiosity about God. And she said, if the time will come that God may let you see him, because I would pester her. I was an only child for a long time, and I would say, I want to see God, and blah, blah, blah. So she would just say, that will happen, that will happen. So I was a daily going to mass with my grandmother and my mother, and the rituals around the religion were deeply moving to me, because even though there were some other Polish families, I lived in what was known like as immigrant town. It was a town that we had workers in the mills from Italy, from Poland, Irish, and Russian people. And so everybody had their own grandparents were speaking foreign languages. And it was a thrilling event because the majority of the people in this little town were all Catholics, but everyone celebrated Catholic festivals slightly differently, because they added their own foods, their own narratives of the Christmas story. And it was fun. You could go to someone's house and see things differently and get to eat special food that was all blessed. We actually took our food to the church and had it blessed before we ate it on special occasions. So it was a very joyous beginning for me, and a real truth of God's presence. So I was rooted in a firm belief that there was a God. I never doubted at that particular time that there wasn't a God. So that's what I have to say now. Thank you. And I forgot to...
Sai, thank you, Terry. So similar to Frank, it seems like your Catholic tradition really gave you a good, solid, strong foundation early on. Next up, we have Kevin.
Sairam, brothers and sisters, and respected elders, it is my privilege to be with you for this panel, and to continue on about my journey to Swami. As a young child, I started out in very humble beginnings, and the one thing that stood out in my mind and was taught to me by a grandparent was how people who had faith always performed better. They always lived better lives, and that prompted me to take Christianity seriously as a child. And I had these spectacular wishes and dreams, and I would use my imagination to put myself at the feet of Jesus as he delivered various sermons that are depicted in the Bible. And anyway, this was a fantastic source of motivation, of faith, of devotion that I had. But at the same time, as my bio mentioned, I was also growing up in a period of some, at times, intense violence. And I happened to be unprotected from visually seeing and reading about that violence. And so that's to some degree clouded my devotion for the time. And anyway, I had great hopes of becoming one with Christ, but I found myself stymied or just at a stalemate. So anyway, through the good fortune of Swami's grace, I, similar to my brother that picked up a book as well, I picked up a book, 1, 2, 3, and I would say on the third or fourth book, I said, that's it. Swami's for me. And I've been on this fantastic, wonderful journey ever since. And I'm so humbled to say there are no words to describe my appreciation for the fact that through Swami, I've been able to sit at the feet of Jesus and drink in the beauty of the divine message of God. So that's it.
Sai, that's wonderful. So that yearning you've had since a child was fulfilled with your knowledge and interactions with Sai Baba. Beautiful. So now up we have Andrew.
Saidam, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I would say my father and my mother introduced me to religion in the way that many American families do, and that we went, Christmas and Easter a couple times a year. We were all baptized. I think my oldest sister had her first communion, which is around 13. It's kind of a coming of age. It could be younger. I may be remembering it wrong, but I do know that my mom and dad both had kind of pulled away from the church because they didn't want us to grow up with too much of a guilt complex. They wanted us to see things from an intellectual and spiritual point of view. So when we talk about Jesus or religion, we would talk about them from a very, I would say, logical, spiritual point of view. For example, I remember coming home one day after I'd spent an evening talking to a friend of mine about Jesus. One of the things they say in the Catholic Church and in all churches is that once you accept Jesus in your heart, you do everything for him. And she would say, as a joke, when you go on the highway and turn left, you do that so you can get to where you're going. You don't do it because your heart is filled with love for Jesus. I mean, that's obviously a metaphor for something deeper. So she would really try to make things understandable for us. And when I was in college, I got into her collection of books from the East. My favorite being Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And then I worked with a man who had a book about Sai Baba. And after I finally convinced him to tell me where the center was, I went, and immediately when I saw Swami's picture, I knew that this would be my group. And as mentioned before, I can't tell you why, because I had been to other teachers and other meditation groups, and I had some really intense experiences, but it wasn't the same at all. And of course, those of you who have seen Sai Baba in person, there's just no describing that feeling. And it's, as was said, it's like being in the presence of Jesus or any enlightened being. There are no words, there's no convincing. It's just a feeling that you get by being around somebody who's so deeply immersed in spirit. So,
Sai, thank you, Andrew. Wonderful. So you actually started answering our second question, and I was going to start with you anyways. So the second question is, can you share how you came to know about Sai Baba? So Andrew, you touched on it a little bit. Anything else you want to share regarding that time period in your life?
Yeah, there are two stories that I'll add to that. I had started meditating on my own once I read Yogananda's book. I was meditating quite a bit, hours a day, at least trying to. I didn't know any techniques or anything, but I would just sit in the same place. And I can't remember at what age it happened, but maybe when I started karate in high school, when I started meditating with my karate teacher would teach us to meditate after we would run or do any physical exercise to calm ourselves down. And so I really started getting into meditation throughout college. And I actually went to college, which I didn't find out later on, with a guy named Rami Yogendra, who actually his family is really into the Sai Center and were devotees in Tampa. And years later, I saw him at the center, and he said he must have had a picture of Sai Baba in his room, but I missed it. And the next I heard about Sai Baba was my yoga teacher from high school or college had mentioned that she had heard about somebody from India who could produce, by waving his hand, gold and things like that. And I just thought, I'm not interested in that at all. I want to know the truth about life. What are we doing here? What's the point of all of this? How do I become, spiritually advanced? So I just kind of ignored that. And then again, when I went to, I worked at another place. I told actually with a man who I worked with, he no longer went to the center anymore, but he had Sai Baba's compendium of teachings. And so, as I said, I went to the center. And then about a year later, I went to see Sai Baba in Whitefield in Brindavan. That's when I was able to see him in person. And again, in 2005 in Puttaparthi. So that's in short.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. Kevin, back to you. How can you share how you came to know about Sai Baba?
By all means, and mine is somewhat of a uncommon path where it wasn't instantaneous. It was through his writings, through his discourses. And I realized this is not a normal level of philosopher. This is being written by some great soul. And so my recognition was more of one of an intellectual one. So now I might add too, and I think this is important, is the we used to use a term called going into Swami's wash machine. And what that means is that different souls come into the fold of the Sai organization or Swami, and the level of imperfection is such that there's quite a few corrections that are necessary. Now, some souls, they come to Swami and those corrections are very small. I'm not one of those people. So anyway, Swami in just a wonderful, wonderful way went about the whole process of setting up all these life lessons. And at the time, I was just experiencing the discomfort. But as I look back on it, every one of those situations was something that was very carefully crafted to improve me. So anyway, that's mine has been a karma yoga journey. And I might add too is I have a saying, and that is the Swami tells us so many things that we should do. I can't do a number of them, but I can do service. So my path has been one where I've always enjoyed and participated in service. And that's been a wonderful aspect of my journey.
Sayonara, beautiful. Sayonara, thank you. So that washing machine, I think all of us can relate that Swami usually doesn't give us what we think we want, what we think we need, but he gives us what we need. And that's the sign of a true master. So next up we have Terry.
Yes, I will always hold dear in my heart the experience of Baba for me. By 1989, I was seeking many answers to many questions and studying many books, and I got a fellowship as a writer to spend a year in Australia and in New Zealand. And it gave me a lot of free time. I did have assignments for a magazine that I received the fellowship from. I had to fulfill those duties, but I didn't have any like household chores or gardening or anything. I was more or less free. And I began to have a series of inner mystical things happening, spontaneous periods during my meditation that were enriched, but I didn't know how this was possible. And particularly in New Zealand, it was there that I got to go into what they call the bush, the woods. And the place I was staying was high up in the bush, but I could look down at the full sea and the waves and everything. And I began to have these feelings that I was being called into the bush and seeing things, and I didn't understand any of them. And on the day that I was leaving, a tree that I passed every day, and there were never people, it was always me by myself, was carved into a tree the word true, because I was doubting if, why was I having these inner blissful experiences. And I just saw the word true. And then I flew back to Laguna Beach, California, where I was living, and I had to rent. I had put my stuff in storage, and I had to rent a little apartment. So I looked around, and I saw this apartment, and a very nice man greeted me. And he told me about the apartment. And then I told him my things were in storage. I just got back from New Zealand, and I said, I really don't know how I'm going to manage, because I sold my car while I was gone. I don't have a car. And he looked at me and he said, well, you can borrow my little pickup truck. And then he pointed to the truck, and I looked into the truck, and I saw this picture of Swami, and it really wasn't one of these beautiful pictures of Swami. It was like a little thing you stick on your dashboard. And I took one look at that picture, and I felt like inwardly that he was the one who had given me those experiences in New Zealand. But so I just looked at this man who I didn't know was a Baba devotee, and I said, who is that guy? And he said, that is Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba. And as soon as he said Sai Baba, I felt like someone had kicked me in the heart. Not, I stepped back, and I said, but what is he? What is he? I couldn't understand how this little decal could produce that effect in me. And he said, sometime we'll talk about it. But he's a guru in India, and my wife is there now. She's visiting him. She's Indian. He was a California Highway Patrol officer. And I said, oh, is your wife related to this guru? And he said, no, not at all. And I said, well, does she believe in him? And he said, absolutely. And I said, do you? And he said, absolutely. Well, I was off and running. My mind was doing all kinds of things. And eventually I settled in to the apartment by the grace of Swami, helping me find someone who not only let me borrow his pickup truck, but decided he had to come and help me get my few furnishings. And I began then asking Neela, when she got back from India, his wife, a million questions, and she would not answer these questions. And she was not forthcoming, not proselytizing or anything. And I found that so mysterious. But one day she relented, because I had to take the early bus to work. And she said, you can go to the Laguna Beach Library, and there are many books about Satya Sai Baba. I said, I'm a writer and a journalist. I've never heard of him. I'm so arrogant. And she said, well, she said, you cannot hear even his name until he decides that you can. So eventually, she lent me a book she had, and it was Phyllis Crystal's The Ultimate Experience. And I read that book from cover to cover to cover to cover. And meantime, I got myself a little car, and I was completely baffled by this Sai Baba. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I had my car, I parked it in front of our house, the apartment. And the day that I picked up the book to read it again, the fifth time, and no one could get into my apartment because I was the only one with the key. I picked the book up and I opened it, and out fell a photograph. And that little photograph was Swami standing right beside the car that I had bought. Oh, I really thought I was going to die. It was such a profound mystery. And I went running to their door, knocked on their apartment, and I said, look at this, look at this. And I showed her the photo, and she said, that's the car you just bought. And I said, yes. She said, well, sometimes when Swami performs a miracle for a devotee, the devotee doesn't quite get it. So he has to perform another one so that it will underscore it. And I said, oh, so that was how I began. And right from that day forward, I took every job I could get. I again sold all my stuff. I was on my way to Puda Party. One way or other, I was going to get there. And I got there. So that's how it started. It started like that. So thank you.
Fascinating. It's amazing how we look back at what we call coincidences, and many times it's only until later that we realize that it was actually a divine plan, a way to bring us in to the fold. Next up, we're back to Frank.
Okay. Well, I'll try to be as succinct and to the point, but when I first heard about Swami in the early 70s, I thought, I'll go to see him when I retire. And I lived many years of my early married life just all about making money. I had no sadhana. I only had a dim belief in Jesus, but there was no practice of religion. And the way I came to Swami was through trouble. I had marital distress in my life, had a major problem, and tried all the conventional ways. And I said, well, I read about him years ago. What I'll do is I'll go to India and I'll meet him and he'll give me an interview like he gives people, and he'll fix things up in my marriage. So that was my thinking. And I did go to India, and I did go to Puttaparthi and Vrindavan, and I saw Swami. And the main benefit I see in retrospect was that whole marital trouble was like a whack in the head. It was something that was a grace and a benefit because it got me on a path of just going through this incarnation mindlessly. And I started to develop an inquiry and devotion. And so that was the great benefit. I want to say one little thing about my being in India and trying to get to see Swami. It may be meaningful to those who have been there. I was at the end of a 2-week stay, and I realized that Swami had not even looked at me in all the darshans that I had been to, and even sometimes when I was in the first and second row, no visual contact from the day one where he did take my letter to right before I was going to leave. And I thought, well, I think that there's so much hubbub when there can be a quiet darshan line, but when he comes down, all of a sudden people get jostling about and excited, and I couldn't even hear my own voice when I tried to ask Swami for an interview. And I thought, this isn't working. What I'll do is I'll get up in the middle of the night and I'll go outside the room where he sleeps. And I will pray seriously and intently. And he will open his door and have me come in, and he'll scold me for being a slouch and for being lazy and etc. But he'll fix things up the way I want them to be fixed up. Well, I waited in the quiet of the night outside his room, and I prayed so earnestly. And the next day I thought, he'll give me an interview right before I leave. But no, I was way in the back, and I thought, and I had sort of given up hope, if you know what I mean. I thought, this isn't working. And as Swami was coming in front of the men's line, I was about 14 rows back. He turned and he looked. No, actually, it was right as he was getting done with darshan, but going by the men's section. And he all of a sudden turned, and his eyes drilled into me in a very arresting way. He turned and took one step, and then, as though I might not get the meaning of it, he did the same thing again. And it was such an intense look, and I was stunned. And so as I drove away to the party and got on the plane, I thought, I have belief now that my prayers weren't just bouncing around the inside of my head, that I did reach him, but he wasn't going to intervene in the way I wanted. And that was a great gift. So that's just my story.
Sai, thank you, Frank. It's amazing how we think we know what we need, and so many times he responds in what we really need, and it's oftentimes he extracts so much from us, right? Just the effort that you put in to pray does not go in vain. He extracts everything, and then we finally surrender, and that in and of itself is another lessening of the ego. And I think all of us can relate to that process. So thanks for sharing. Next question is how have Satya Sai Baba's teachings influenced your understanding of Christianity? And we'll start this one with Terry.
Well, that's very apparent. I, who was not too taken with Jesus in my early Christianity, I was more interested in this God that Jesus had said, my Father in heaven. And Swami had told us at one Christmas time that Jesus was first a man, then he was the Son of God, and then in his last teachings, Jesus said, my Father and I are one. And that is what Swami's message is clearly for me, that first he's like our guru, our savior, and then he grows into our everything, and then he tells us that we are him. There is no separation between us. God, we are God. And then that evolution, especially when you're living there and hear it repeatedly over the years, it starts to happen. It's a transformation of how we perceive it. But essentially, that awareness that first we are separate, then we belong to Swami, like God the Father, and then the Father and I are one. And in Swami's case, we call him Sai Ma also. He's the totality. So it brought me back, you might say, to what the Catholic teachings were all about that got eroded over the years. And today, anywhere that I travel in the world, I will go to a Catholic church, and I feel very much the sameness that I do in that church as I do in the Mandir inside Kulwan Hall. It's just the Brahma, purity itself, unity itself, and we're one with that. So I embrace all religions because I see that that is the same process in every religion to bring us to the realization that we are not separate from that which we worship. We are that, in the I am that. So it's an exciting journey. I believe and hold that it gets more exciting as time goes on for us because it's always a process. There's no like, and this is the end and they lived happily ever after. It's really just the beginning. So I feel that connection to not only Christianity, but other religions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, for sharing that understanding of connectivity and oneness. Beautiful. Let's see. How about we go to Andrew?
Yeah, I would have to say I agree with what was said in that it's not just Christianity, but all religions now. When I was in college, before I found Swami, I used to go to a Buddhist temple that was near me. I didn't know anything about it. They spoke in Vietnamese the whole time. They had a great vegetarian feast afterwards, which is really nice when you're 21 and don't know how to cook. But I agree. I think I found the spirituality in Christianity and all religions. When I hear about specific practices like confession, I think, confession is actually a really good, if you remove it from the power dynamic, it's a really good healing process. You have things that you won't admit to anybody, but you can just get them off your chest, And so I really see Christianity. I relate to Christ as a perfected being. When I think about God the Father, I think about fatherhood. We all need a father and mother. Eventually, sooner or later, our parents go, and we need that in our life. And, a connection, that personal connection that Jesus taught us in such a simple way. It reminds me of Swami's teachings. In fact, some of them are the exact same teachings. And furthermore, I would say that saints of all religions, when you read them, they're very mystical in the sense that they only practice dogmatism to the point that it serves their discipline, but they've gone way beyond the discipline to have a spiritual experience. So I understand Jesus, I mean, in my limited way, of course, in a very personal and spiritual way. And as was said, whenever I travel, not only do I go to Catholic churches, but I find anywhere where that is open to us. In Morocco, they wouldn't let us go into mosques. I think you had to be Muslim, but some of the oldest churches in the world are in Spanish-speaking countries in the West. So I've been able to go to those and sit in the back and hear the mass and just see the pictures of angels. And, one interesting thing I find about teaching language is that you often find people's confusion about the word Allah or, these are words that mean God. So if you're Christian and you live in an Arabic-speaking country, you call God Allah and you call the Virgin Mary Adra. It's not a different being. It's just a different name. Just like when you go to Spain and you say hat, you use a different word, but it's the same thing. So Swami's teachings have really given me that connection to, they're really saints. There's a possibility for forming a saint in any religion.
Amanda, yeah, beautiful. So just seeing that sameness is just a beautiful thing. Next up, we have Frank.
Okay, thank you. And I've been thinking that this will be a little bit more challenging for me than some of the other answers about my background and my experiences in India. Because, speaking candidly, it seems that the essential message of Swami is a progression. It is, as I understand it, a profound step further than was what is extant in not only Catholicism, but in Christianity in general. Namely, there was always two in my understanding. There's the individual and there was God. Of course, as devotees, we have the teaching that Swami says, you are God. And that is so profound. It's something I didn't get. It wasn't so much that it was out there and I didn't appreciate it. I simply did not hear that heretofore until, and it is on a daily basis something that I am stepping further along with. I hope you can understand what I'm trying to say here, that I can't say much more about this, but I think it's a tremendous blessing. It's a profound truth that we are divine and we don't know it, and that our whole earthly experience is coming into that divinity, that we are God, we are not different than God, and that is so super profound and important. There you go.
Sayonara, Frank. And I think a lot of us can maybe not understand it, but it seems to resonate when we hear it. It seems to draw us and resonate. So I think for everyone when you hear it. Kevin,
Okay.
how has Sai Baba's teachings influenced your understanding of Christianity?
That has been one of the most spectacular events of my life. And in my studies of Christianity, I found it quite perplexing in that it's such a faith that's so factionalized. So many different authoritarian scholars and so forth that have so many interpretations of the Bible. And anyway, the gift that Swami gives all Christians is the ability to cut through what is fact and what Jesus taught and who God is, as opposed to some other concepts that might have varied away from what Christ originally taught. So to me, Swami has been Swami is Christianity's best friend, in that there's the potential for this faith to one day thrive as it's purified through the use of Swami's teachings. Om Jai Sai Ram.
I love that perspective. That Swami is Christianity's best friend. Just shedding the true light that may have been hidden, and perhaps a few special souls along the years may have really understood it, but certainly as an institution, perhaps it hasn't been propagated. And let's move on to the next question. And this one is, what do you think is the greatest misunderstanding about the teachings of Christ? And we'll stick with you, Kevin, and we'll go the other direction again.
And some of the other panelists probably have some expertise on this, but the painting with a broad brush, the fire and brimstone, the many of the letters authored or purportedly authored by St. Paul, they speak of really what a vengeful God, I would say. And anyway, I think this is most unfortunate in that this is on occasion has given different very devoted Christians a license to do some things that are certainly less than ideal. So there's the painting with a broad brush. The theocracies that have taken place throughout history have led to some rules and regulations that were quite harmful to humanity. And today's a new day in that through Sai teachings, such things can be cast away, and humanity can return to the core teachings of Jesus. Yeah.
Sairam, yeah, beautiful. Frank, what do you think is the greatest misunderstanding about the teachings of Christ?
You know, I'm drawing a blank on that. I wish I could be more fruitful in a reply, but I wouldn't be saying anything that almost all of we panelists and people in general know that there's the Sermon on the Mount, which is the encapsulation of the essential teachings of Jesus, and then there's the profusion of doctrine and practices. What I remember from the statement in the gospel where Jesus said, "The Father and I are one. I am that I am." That was his profound statement of his divinity, his at oneness with the eternal Godhead. But I didn't understand anything in the Gospels that Jesus said what Swami says, that not only am I God, but you also are God, but you don't know it yet. So I realize I'm not giving as good an answer as you requested about what is the greatest misunderstanding of Christ's teachings, but that's where my head is at right now.
Yeah, and I think you brought light that maybe the question could be confusing, because if you understand the Sermon on the Mount as the teachings of Christ, they're very similar to Christ's teachings. Whereas maybe the question should have been, what is the greatest misunderstanding that has been interpreted by the church or by institutionalized Christianity, as opposed to what was on the Sermon on the Mount? And I think you touched on that very well. Andrew, what do you have to say?
I would say that it's a misconception in probably every religion, and that the person who the religion is built around is worshipped and the teachings are not practiced. And I'm not pointing particularly at Christianity, just more like that's a human way of doing. You see this in Buddhism, you see this in the Sikh religion, where, the last guru got rid of the guru worship, and he said, well, just use the book will be your teacher. And now people worship the book, and they put the book up on the altar. And as Sai Baba has said, you can't read a cookbook and fill your hunger. People worship Jesus, as is part of religion, in the way that a devotional part is important and necessary. I believe it's a good way to open up your heart. But if you're truly Christian, the meaning of the word Christian means Christ-like, which means you practice his teachings. And this is something that Jesus talked about even with his disciples. He would go up to the garden or get some money, and he would complain about how other disciples are just there sleeping while he's doing his meditation. If you're a true Christian, you will practice his teachings and become one with God, as Jesus did. We don't know how many lifetimes before his life, but the worshiping is the very first part. It's like the entrance. Okay, this is a person that I love and worship. I accept Jesus in my heart. Now I'm going to act like him until I become like him. I read a short story where Yogananda was on the train and he was arguing with the minister, and he didn't say what the argument was about, but I have a feeling it was about that Jesus is the only way, the light. And he wouldn't admit it. And the priest, so mad and screaming at him, well, you're going to hell. And Yogananda said, I don't know if I'm going to hell or not. Maybe that's right, but you're in hell right now. Meaning that, people get so caught up in their belief that they forget about the experience of God by doing practices. Saito.
Thank you, Andrew. Terry, what is your thought on the greatest misunderstanding?
Misunderstanding. The essence of the teachings of Jesus the Christ is love God with your whole heart and love your neighbor as yourself. So that comes right down, shrink it down to love all and serve all. So, and the great misunderstanding in my personal experience is that people don't understand that it was always the Judeo-Christian tradition. But then people made the split. They said, no, all that Moses stuff was over there in the Old Testament, and the truth is only in the New Testament. Whereas you can't have one without the other. It was Moses who received the 10 Commandments from God, okay? It was Jesus who said there are only 2 commandments. Love God with your whole heart, love your neighbor as yourself. But then enters, as someone pointed out, St. Paul, and then a lot of scholarly people come in to expound upon that matter. And so in the Catholic Church, a child is taught the 10 Commandments. That's the guideline. You know, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that. There's 10 things. But those were already established in Judaism. Jesus was born a Jew and he died a Jew. I remember they are in the 8th grade in Catholic school that came to my realization, because allegedly on the crucifix they wrote Jesus, King of the Jews. And I remember being so excited, and I ran home and I told my mother, Jesus was born a Jew and he died a Jew. And she slapped me. My mother was not a slapper ever. And because there was a lot of anti-Semitism in these provincial little settlements in the U.S. where people were living, and they didn't have the expanded knowledge or information. So that's why we always seek the truth and we find answers. And Swami always says, trust your own experience. Book knowledge we must have, but experiential knowledge. So what you feel about someone, that's what you feel about someone. But that for me is the biggest misunderstanding. Is that thinking that Jesus was not Jewish because they found he was found in Christianity. But the thing is, they're just hooked together. That's why Swami had to be asked to put the Star of David in the Sarvadharma sign. And he told, I forget who was the U.S. representative at that time. He said, it's already there. The cross is the symbol of Judaism and Christianity. The cross crossed out the ego. But somehow Swami said, okay, we can put the Star of David. So, but it's so true. So a lot of this fighting among religions and everything is just based on learned prejudices, you know, which is so sad. I even remember somebody said to me, well, you lived there for 27 years. How did it feel to be a Hindu? I said, I wasn't a Hindu. I think Swami is teaching Hinduism or something. But it's all wonderful. It's all wonderful. And we're in a blossoming now of information, and Swami's teachings are spreading even more, and the youth movement and everything is just great.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it reminds me how the saying of God simplifies and unites, and man complicates and divides. And I think you could see that in the history of probably every movement started by every great soul. Is the consciousness of the followers is not at that level, and the ego and selfishness is taking over, then they can be led astray, and all of us can then be led astray if we don't go back to the roots. So let's fascinating conversation. So let's go into something a little bit more practical. The last question is, what practical ways do you incorporate Christ or Baba's, if you view them as essentially having the same message? What practical ways do you incorporate those teachings into your life? So this time we'll start with Terry.
I do that little trick that Swami told us about himself. When I'm with a man, I'm a man. When I'm with a woman, I'm a woman. When I'm with a child, I'm a child. I don't know if you've ever heard that. But that's what I do. Whenever I meet someone, I know that person is, divine. Okay, even some of the nasty people that we have to function with in this world. And what I do is, when I'm with someone, I speak to them in the way that they want to be spoken to. When I'm with a Catholic, for instance, I never speak about Sai Baba or gurus, especially again in provincial areas or regional areas. There's a lot of feeling about just the word guru, and I'm not going to stand there and say the word only means teacher, because that's engaging in talk that's not producing that oneness. So I do that when I'm with a child. I'm a child and talk about things. But there are a lot of truths. Divine wisdom can be, just for example, talking about a seashell with a child. You can ask profound questions, like where did it come from? What do you know about these things? So that's how I try to keep the purity and unity and the importance of that we do have a responsibility as Sai Baba devotees. We're not out there to discourse and fight and make splits. And we're only there to simplify, as you said, simplify and unite. And we can't do that if we've got an agenda. So I've been in airports that land in the Gulf sometimes, or I fly on Arab airlines and things. And I'm always welcome in the prayer room, which the only prayer room that I've ever seen in these airports has been Islam gathering, and the women are separate. And I've just gone in and put my shawl, my dupatta on my head, and nobody prevents me from praying. And so those are the things that I can be a part of something without saying, well, if only this was true or that was true. So I love it. I love it. But Swami always has the simple answers,
Sign on that. Thank you, Terry. Andrew, what practical ways do you incorporate those teachings?
Well, I try to have a genuine, deep spiritual experience every day through meditation, yoga, prayer. I constantly talk to my God in my inner voice, and I try to do a little bit of service. For example, I keep food in my car because we have a lot of homeless people who wait at stoplights. So it's a really easy way to do service. I consider my job as part of my spiritual exercise. So I try to always remain calm and in a good mood and do the right thing and go beyond what I should be doing. And I try to be inclusive of other peoples and cultures. For example, I try to, in my classes, talk about different religions, holidays, like if Holi comes up or if it's Hanukkah, I'll ask my students about, what did you do for Hanukkah? How are you celebrating? And so my students can kind of understand the unity in all of these things.
Beautiful, beautiful. And next up we have Frank.
Thank you. Well, on a practical note, what I try to do on a weekly basis of incorporating Swami's message filters down to the particular psychophysical setup I have. And what I mean by that is that in the East, in India in particular, we are taught that there's three general paths to God. There's the karma, the bhakti, and the jnana path. And some proclivities are more in one direction than the other, although a healthy goal is to have a mix. But getting back to my own setup and my own background and inclination is towards the jnana. And so in particular, after supper in the evening, when I'm relaxed, I read about Vedanta. And oftentimes it isn't just Swami's words, but it's other essential Vedantic teachings that are immensely meaningful to me. And I'm prompted in this regard because I remember Swami saying, or writing, I guess I read it once, that unless you make inquiry, and that means that unless we take the initiative to delve into it ourselves, the implication was that we will live a useless life and we will not go on after the death to a more advanced condition. So I've taken that to heart recently in the last period of time, and that's my path right now.
Right on, beautiful. Thank you, Frank. And Kevin, what is your practical way of putting those teachings?
Sai Ram, in the understanding I have of Christianity, Jesus was foremost teacher. And so I say to all listeners is give teaching a try as a form of seva. And the rewards in my life from playing the role of the teacher go beyond anything that I could create the words to describe. So I in fact am the greatest student of all the students that I might teach, and I'm constantly learning and refining and growing spiritually through the act of teaching. So the one takeaway from Christianity is be Christ-like and take on this role of teaching. There's always a need within the community, and I encourage everyone to give it a try.
Right on. Thank you, Kevin. Well, our time is coming to a close, and I really felt we had a wonderful, heartfelt discussion. I want to really extend my gratitude to all the panelists for coming and sharing with us. And I think we've had such a very insightful session on the interpretation of Christianity when we view it through that lens that Satya Sai Baba has provided for all of us. So we hope all of you have enjoyed this discussion, and we look forward to having all of the listeners join us as we journey through the understanding of all the other great traditions from more followers of Satya Sai Baba. And I thought I would end this session with one of my favorite quotes from Sai Baba, which I think is so relevant right now in our society. There's so many differences, there's so much discord. People feel like their view is right and the other person's view is wrong. And this is a quote from a book Swami wrote called Satya Sai Vahini. And I wanted to read that out. Quote, when people who are fanatical in their beliefs about God approach us, we must welcome them with a smile and be eager to listen to them with a heart filled with devotion to God. When someone who is passionate about his or her work approaches us, we must share with them our skill and strength and toil together. By this means, it is possible to bring harmony between followers of various faiths and cultures. It will bring together various schools of thought and belief. How wonderful it would be if this kind of harmony and friendly cooperation becomes more prevalent. How happy the world would be if everyone comprehends that their viewpoint can at best be only the partial truth, and that it requires the harmonious commingling of many other facets to arrive at the whole truth. So with that message, I thank all of our panelists once again and look forward to our next session coming up shortly. Jai Sai Ram. Thank you all.
Okay, so.